Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bill of Rights Institute's 10th period webinar series. My name is Kirk Higgins. I'm the Senior Manager for Content at the Bill of Rights Institute, and I am joined once again by my colleagues, Gary and Rachel.
Hello.
Hello.
This is our final episode of this 10th period season as we shift into summer mode where we're going to be doing some new and exciting things. And we're fortunate this week to be joined to sort of reflect on what we've gone over the last few months here and what we're going to be doing by our president, David Bobb. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Kirk. It's wonderful to be with you and with all of the amazing teachers who are wrapping up a school year.
Absolutely, and you know, we're wrapping up the school year in the midst of a very civically focused moment, as we've seen over the past few days, protests across the nation concerning the death of George Floyd, and you know, that's something that we at the Bill of Rights Institute have been thinking about, and how is it that we help students during these times of civic action, and how it is that we continue to think about civil society, you know, even coming on top of the COVID-19 situation as well. And so we're excited. Today we're hoping to think through and talk about that, and think about and talk about future things that BRI is going to be doing to continue to help educators as you all prepare for an upcoming semester that we face a lot of uncertainty, and that we're all working through together and thinking through these problems as a community. So
David, what have you been thinking about as you've seen things unfolding for the past couple of days?
Well, I've had, like I think so many Americans, a heavy heart about what we witnessed, and the murder of George Floyd is one of many events that sadly has happened in the last number of months. It's one of a string that has happened over the last number of years, and it comes on top of things that by any lights are not changing fast enough. I think that's the thing that I'm struck by the most. You know, we here with our colleagues across the country who are working with young hearts and minds know that history and civics are tools. They are vehicles for fostering a conversation. And so many teachers do the work of going deep with those conversations. And no matter what kind of a community you've fostered over the course of, say, a school year, or maybe you've taught for many years, it's hard to fathom the depths to which we have to go to touch and really to touch the place that we need to be at a nation, as a nation, at a time like this. My 10-year-old son asked me this morning, what's happening with the protests? And I thought, where to begin, right? Because the anger that's there right now is about an incident and several incidents, but it's about so much more. And I think to reflect on what that means requires that we do understand and breathe deeply of our history. I have such admiration for what our teacher colleagues across the country are doing. That's why BRI exists, to help serve you, support you, to work with you in the immense task of trying to get to that very deep place. Because we know that our nation is hurting now. A lot of young people are hurting. They wonder, what does this country's beginnings, such promise, right? Equality and liberty for all, what does that have to do with the reality that we see today? And I think it's okay for us to acknowledge that alienation is understandable, especially for those who are living in communities in which this kind of violence is a daily and weekly occurrence. Violence that too often is perpetrated by those who are charged with the protection of public security. I'm a native of a suburb of Minneapolis, and this struck me in a way to see a community that is torn apart, And yet, I think if there's one thing that we might say, it's torn apart in one way, and we hate to see destruction. You know, one of the things that was burned was a new housing development for those who do not have homes right now, 168 unit complex. That breaks your heart too. And I think the moment calls for us to reflect on what is it to stand up for the promise of the Declaration of Independence in a very real way. Teachers are really amazing about getting beyond lip service to documents. And that's one thing that I've learned from our teacher community. It's one thing that I've learned from each of you who are doing this 10th period, from you, Rachel, Kirk, and Gary. And what we want to be able to do at the Bill of Rights Institute is help in this time by standing in solidarity with all of you who are working to foster the kind of conversations that can heal those divides, that can say, these are the things that we need to be able to tell our 10-year-olds, our 12-year-olds, our 14-year-olds, our 16-year-olds. And one of the things that I am hopeful about is that those voices empowered will actually be able to tell us a lot. Some of the programs that we have for this summer, Constitutional Academy, for example, is always one of the highlights of my year, because I go in there and I hear those young people say, we can do better. And we can, and we must. We have to do better as a country, because those ideals are not just sitting out there up in the ether, you know, written on a textbook, on a parchment. They're nothing if they're that. You know, Madison called the Constitution itself, and the Bill of Rights really specifically, a parchment barrier, right? It's just a piece of paper if it's not held in our hearts. And I think the things that we can learn together and you know, take from these texts, from these reflections, have to become a reality. And for so many of our fellow citizens right now, they are not that. And we have to recognize that and do better as a people, and as a people that really stand reflecting on what brings us together and how do we heal those wounds that are very, very real.
Yeah, civics, something we talk about internally. Civics is a lived thing, and it's something that is dynamic, and it's something that the educators we work with know well. It's ever changing. It changes from generation to generation, and it's something that requires action from us to really live out. And you know, as I reflect over what we've talked about over the past few months and the work that we're continuing to do, thinking about how our actions in our lives really give life and contour to our constitutional society, because it's more than just a document. It's something that requires all of us to participate in order to achieve that promise of equality that we saw at the, you know, in the Declaration of Independence.
And it goes, I think it even, I mean, it goes beyond that for our educators, right? So I think our educators, you know, when we take on the responsibility of being in front of young people for hours of our weeks and our lives, we take on a civic mission, right? And that civic mission causes us to have to make choices about what we present in front of our students, how we engage them, what we focus on. And I think too often, you know, there are organizations within schools that let those conversations happen, and sometimes there are organizations within schools that don't let those conversations happen. And so I'm seeing a lot of my friends in, you know, in the educator community really struggling with how to have these important conversations and really live their civic mission as educators. Many, especially history and civics teachers, right? I mean, there's no way you can become a history teacher without recognizing that the work you're doing is fundamentally supporting like the democratic Republican institutions of the United States. And so there's such an importance that we place on ourselves that isn't always reflected in our communities and how we interact, how our communities support us. And so I think that's another thing that is really striking me, is that there's the community support for civic education may be enhanced by some of the things that are happening right now. Kirk mentioned that civics is a living thing. When we proposed this topic a week ago, it was a very different civic moment that we thought we would be talking about today, right? And a week from now, it'll be a different civic moment, because we live in a dynamic, ever-changing, multifaceted society. So part of the work that we're trying to do is provide you with those constant resources and communities of support.
Right. I mean, whether or not you are watching this live or at some point in the near or somewhat distant future, I think a lot of what we're talking about is the idea that things are ongoing, right? This episode was meant to say the school year is wrapping up, but really, as teachers know, the school year just transforms, and Kirk started by saying that as well, right? The work is ongoing into the summer, and the work that is done has these elements you're all describing, which I think are so powerful. I mean, I'm biased toward civics and history as a social studies teacher in the past, but that ongoing work of becoming well-informed, helping others to become well-informed, engaging in dialogue, engaging in thought processes, and then planning for the future, and I mean most practically August, September, comes a lot sooner than it seems. And so this is such a powerful time. But as we've been saying, civics is ongoing back centuries and way into the future. And it really is so future oriented that, again, that work is just transformed in summer. It's not starting or ending.
Right. And especially this summer, because we have it's going to be a truncated summer, and there's so much more work to do to figure out what the fall looks like for educators, both because of the COVID crisis, but also in light of the questions that will come into the classroom from this civic moment relating to systemic racism and poverty and, government policy around criminal justice reform and, the right to protest and the right to assembly and what all of that means was already part of larger conversations that have been ongoing, it seems like really intensely for the past 4 or 5 years, but for the past 20 years, for the past 50 years, for the past 200 years, these are ongoing conversations that maybe this is the moment where we have a big leap forward in how those concerns have been addressed. Again, kind of as educators, we're always optimistically future oriented. We wouldn't put ourselves through working with the teenagers if we weren't optimistic.
Well, isn't that their great perspective too, right? Which imbues us as older Americans, shall we say, our younger American colleagues who are yet in their teenage years push us in that direction.
Yeah.
And that's where my hope really is, in that you see young people awakening, and they're totally with the civics future oriented, right? That's maybe why sometimes the history side is a little bit harder. Well, why should I spend time on the past, right? I want to figure out how I solve the future. Mm-hmm. We know the importance, and you all do an amazing job in your classrooms of imparting that, whether you're actually in the classroom or during COVID time, you've been remote, of saying, well, hold on a minute, history is really important here. We have antecedents. But doesn't it seem like the teachable moments have been almost more rapidly coming at us, right? Every day. And in so many ways, I think what has struck me as of late is how often our leadership is letting us down. That's why we also need those young voices to step up. And really, there is an empowering function here, because their natural idealistic place, I believe, syncs up very much with the place that our nation started. We have not lived up to those ideals in the way that we would like to. We have a long ways to go, as we said at the top. But a young person says, I think I can close that gap. I think we can do that. I think we can seek justice. The founders are sometimes portrayed in their wigs and their older years, you know, as octogenarians and old fogies. But one of the watchwords that they had, like Kirk, you're going to be leading some close readings of George Washington, progress was all over his writings, right? We got to put behind us this thing in which we're living at each other's throats, divided over religion, divided over lots of things that they called faction. And they did not see far enough on things like race. We know that. We bring that out in our materials. We need to have that conversation with young people. But the good news is our faith is not in the founders. Our faith is in the ideas to which they looked and which the subsequent generations of freedom fighters turned to. This summer, we'll celebrate the 100th anniversary of women achieving the right to vote. They did so because they looked forward. And isn't it remarkable? It's only been 100 years, right? I mean, that's kind of crazy when you think of how old we are. But the women and men who fought for that said, we're going to look forward to a day when we can vote, when we can participate properly. But they also look back to say, in the Declaration, there is that incipient promise of equality, and it is on that which we must stand. I think we need to return to that spirit as we seek to heal these wounds that are freshly reopened in the tragedy isn't even quite the right word, right? Because there's perfidy in what's happening here. There's evil doing. And we all see it, and we want to say, what's our path forward so that we can be more united? Mm-hmm. I think that was the animating spirit of the founding. It's why somebody like Frederick Douglass, you know, one of the most troubling things about watching the 9-minute video in which George Floyd loses his life is that about halfway through, somebody, you can kind of barely hear it, but they call out to the police officer, to the officers assembled there, he's a man, he's a human. He said, he's a human, right? All of the work that Frederick Douglass went into in his entire life was to say to America, I'm a human being. You have to reckon with that. You know, Sojourner Truth, the list of freedom fighters who fought for equality at the same time they fought for freedom was to remind us of that thing. We should not need that reminder today, but we still do. That's because of what human beings are too, right? We're good and we're bad. We're a mix of things. And we have to draw on those better angels right now. That's not magical thinking, supposing that human beings are suddenly going to become new and different and become angelic. That's not going to happen. But we do have those qualities that justify esteem and confidence, as Publius said. And magnifying those things in classroom discussions, empowering young people to be able to discover what that part of them is I think what the education possibility is today.
And that's, I mean, fundamentally, that is the role of education, is to help you see the man in every person, to help you see the humanity and the way in which you and they are alike, and the way in which you and they are different, but the way in which you and they are alike is the kernel of connection that allows society to function. And so when you, like, that idea that I am a human, and then the civil rights, I am a man, you know, that is a direct line, right? And I would say that it is a direct line to all men are created equal, right? Like there's a philosophical thread there that can be drawn out and held up and held. But it needs to be part of the fabric of your education and your understanding of the nature of the world. And that's where our teachers and our communities and our work come in, because that's at the heart, in my opinion, and why I was a teacher for so long, right? Why I do the work I do at the Bill of Rights Institute, is to help young people discover that kernel and nurture it.
Yeah, we speak so much about, uncertainty, which is absolutely true. But even within that uncertainty, is that ongoing sort of eternalness, right? There's the bigger points, the bigger questions. As we're speaking, we think of historical moments, and right now we're always in history, but right now it's very clear it is not something distant that is contained within a class that is to be memorized, but rather that in living in history, everyone is a participant, no matter what it is they're doing, in some way, but by existing within this time period. And so part of that eternalness is our big concepts, but also, when it comes to teaching and uncertainty, there are things that are going to happen. You're going to have conversations with students. You are going to deal with how do we learn things. And so though there is uncertainty, within that are kernels, as you said, of things to hold on to they're really interesting to focus on.
Yeah, and I think those principles to which we look can help provide some guidance. They can give us good things to reflect on and to talk about, that is, like Gary mentioned, eternal, that are questions that others have wrestled with in the past, and we can look at how they have wrestled with it and the challenges that were sought, not to take away from anything that is being experienced now, but to help us understand the context in which we're living, and to help us really grapple with the challenges that are facing us, and as a way of helping us to look towards a better future, one that is more fully realizing these principles. And I think that's the power that comes from the system of government that we have. As Publius said, we're attempting to have a government by reflection and choice, and there is both a responsibility in that and an opportunity in that. It's hard work to reflect and to choose, but in that is the possibility for those better angels to shine forth and to really achieve the fundamental equality that we seek, and to recognize in each other, the humanity that we all have and that we all share. And no matter our perspective or background, it's what unites all of us. And I think, we at the Bill of Rights Institute, continue to want to foster those conversations, and to help educators foster those conversations to get to a place where we're united. Even when we disagree, we can unite around what is common amongst all of us, which is that we are all participating in this American experiment in governing ourselves. And that requires of us facing these difficult conversations and working through these trying times. But that we have the opportunity to do so is a profound thing.
It is a profound thing. The alternative to reflection and choice, Publius said, was accident and force. And that's the way that most human regimes have been organized in the past. In that idea that might makes right. So for somebody like Abraham Lincoln, inheritor of that, and somebody that took the Declaration as what he called the sheet anchor of all of his thinking, he says, if slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong, right? If what we're seeing right now is not wrong, I think we can add to that, then nothing is wrong. On that, there is widespread agreement in this country. On many other things, though, we are divided. And I think, Rachel, you pointed to this moment as being an opportunity for the deepening of our conversations, the strengthening of our convictions. I think there's a way in which, as civics build civil society, more people outside of kind of our immediate community, those who are engaged in the daily practice of education, are coming to recognize that. And so while few people who are involved in civic education have somebody that they meet say, well, that's civics, we don't really need civics, right? It's in the past been a little bit of a, well, that's really nice, I'm glad that you're doing that. Now what I find is that oftentimes people's response is, we need it. We need it more than ever. And I think it's true. It's true that what you all are doing right now in the classrooms in the cultivating of civic friendship with people who are young, yes, but are as desperate for that friendship as anyone, is the most valuable thing that's happening in the country right now. And what we have to see more of is that your work is esteemed and championed, and that's what we're seeking to do through a national movement. And what I can say is that I spend my days very often talking to new, or people who are relatively new to this space. And they're coming to us, and they're coming to other organizations with which and with whom BRI works. Many of you are familiar with them. There are partner organizations in these common endeavors. And they're saying, we need you to be at the fore of educational efforts today, because what these teachers are doing is creating the next generation of Americans. And sometimes I'll stop them and say, well, yes, but they're already there, right? The young people are already there. And that's the thing that I think as we go into the summer, we're really focused on. And we have some, really programs that I think will bring that dynamic quality of conversation to a place where it can also be practical, that these young people are guided along in something like Constitutional Academy, a reflection on not just these ideas as abstract principles, but as things that I can own as a teenager. Mm-hmm. I can understand the place of government. I can understand the place of charity. I can understand the place of entrepreneurship. I can put these things into practice by solving problems that may at first glance even seem insoluble, right? That's what we don't want to have happen right now, is that young people say, this is too big. I don't know where to start. I'm sitting at home in front of my keyboard, sometimes even still kind of confined to my home. How do I possibly go out?
Yeah.
How do I make a difference?
And that question of how to make a difference is really key to most of what we've designed for the past at least 3 or 4 years, if not the past 20 years, but at least the past 3 or 4 years, we've really started to focus on the agency within the curriculum that we're putting together. We saw it with our Votes for Women curricula, which again, the 100th anniversary is coming up. And in that, we have that framework of constitutional change. We see it in the programming, right? So Gary, talk about how agency integrates with Constitutional Academy and this idea of civic action.
Sure. Well, really everything overall that we do is exactly right. And adding to that also how that is intertwined with learning how to learn and to research and to be informed. So perfect example, yes. As we transition into the summer and continue the work, the summer work we're doing touches upon, in Constitutional Academy, as you said, the idea of voices, American voices, but really specifically engaging the students into student voice and youth voice. But a big part of that is being informed, is engaging, is what we like to say prudence in thought, right? Is really understanding not only, again, going beyond facts, but also reason. So Constitutional Academy will have a number of students from across the country continuing to engage, not just in the summer, but through the entire school year, to look at impacts on community, to look at their voice, their agency, and all the different parts of communities, from businesses to philanthropy and charity and policy and everyone that is involved in that. And it's not unconnected to what the teachers will be experiencing in the summer as well. In our Summer Institute, the idea this year is about justice. It's what it was always planned on being. Justice, judicial branch. Yes, exactly. But it was always part of what the plan was going to be. And from high level, the concept of wrestling with justice all the way down to what does that look like in manifestation over history and today and into the future. And even more work for both students and teachers is as we gear up our Think the Vote. That's not going away. That's just, again, transforming. It had been bi-weekly questions, but that was always to gear up to a much larger array of things for teachers and students to contemplate these ideas of agency, justice, education that will continue on into the fall in really robust ways.
And that's, I mean, and that's just like the synchronous programs, the programs that
Right.
are happening, like where people are coming together virtually this summer. Usually it's in person.
Right, and it's all based on curriculum, right? So there's
Right.
that going on.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is like, and then there's Kirk's team who is generating all these resources for you all to help you in your progress and your challenge both this summer and into the future. Specifically, we have LLPH. Kirk, can you talk a little bit about agency and how we're approaching these kinds of difficult conversations in LLPH?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm saying LLPH.
LLPH is our internal moniker for Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, which is our new digital resource, comprehensive U.S. history digital resource that will be released on July 6th. And the approach that we've taken there has student agency at its core, because it's a resource that's meant to be argued with. It's a resource that is intended to be investigated and thought about, and not just memorized. And we've done that by pulling together nearly 100 different scholars to write different narratives and essays for the book. And at times putting those scholars in conversation with one another, asking a big, profound question, and having scholars respond in their own ways to how they interpret that question, to say, look, history is something that you participate in. It's something that you think about and you wrestle with. It's not something that's just laid out for you to memorize and know. And engagement is something we're really excited about. And it's built on a platform with OpenStax out of Rice University, which allows for a lot of robust teacher functionality too. So it allows you to plan out your entire course. It's got a calendar right at the core of the text. And so it's something that's not only interesting and engaging from a content perspective, but also puts you as the teacher at the controls of a really robust and powerful tool that is, it's also aligned to the College Board's AP standards. It has, thousands of multiple choice assessment questions, along with unit essay activities, all built around an inquiry model that just really tries to engage students and you, the educator, in really profound questions that get at the heart of what the American experiment has meant, where we've gotten to today, and how that has been shaped by the lives of Americans from the beginning.
I really like the connection of the overlap of the invitation to learn, the invitation to have dialogue, which is often how it's been expressed what this resource is, and our programs and the conversation we've been having in terms of the invitation to learn, to dialogue, and to act. I think it's an interesting continuity between all of these things that are going on.
Yeah, that dialogue factor is so important, isn't it? Sometimes a typical textbook dropped in the hands of a 16-year-old, it weighs 10 pounds. It comes kind of with the voice of God, right? Telling you, this is the way it is. This is the way it always has been. And there's a way in which that invites no dialogue. It says, here are the answers, toe the line, try to get a 5. And we kicked off this project years ago with the understanding and hearing from all of you how immensely difficult, like I can think of very few things in the classroom that are more difficult than trying to teach all of American history in a year and not feel like you're leading everybody on this kind of, death march through facts and dates, right? Nobody gets into teaching to do that. And so what we really sought to do, and what Kirk and the team have wrestled with, is how do we bring a kind of dialogic quality to the storytelling, so that a student can enter in and say, you know what, I do see that there's multiple sides here. I see that there's in fact probably more than just a polarity. And by the end of a unit, that you feel like you can enter into the conversation. And then by the end of a semester, you feel like, yeah, I have enough knowledge here, but I'm also understanding the story arc better. I'm getting the bigger picture. I'm getting questions that I can hang my hat on. And we think that, the story of what it is to say America is an experiment is at the heart of this thing. Mm-hmm. What kind of an experiment? Well, it's an experiment, and can we live together on this new idea that self-governance has to be at the heart?
Mm-hmm.
We're the first regime that put equality and freedom as the cornerstone. That was a radical experiment, still is. We still see how difficult it is to live that out. And the fact that we don't live up to those principles has been a major part of the experimental failures. And so students reading about those failures, reading about those successes, invites them to take those steps in the historical inquiry process that then is a really great invitation to the civics side, right? And there's civics connections all throughout this resource too, because, you know, I've been participating in a National Endowment for the Humanities project, Educating for American Democracy, and in the fall we'll release a kind of roadmap. And it's trying to bring civics and history more into conversation with one another. And this has been a very familiar conversation for me and for the Bill of Rights Institute, because that's the way that we approach these things. Civics and history are in a constant kind of dialogic companionship.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're trying to do over the course of the summer, and we welcome your insights, your feedback, your, hey, we'd really like you to look at this thing that you've never touched on before, or we think that you could do a better job in this area. All of those things are most welcome. And even as you take a much earned break for what has been a really challenging school year, stay in touch with us, please. Tell us about those things that you're challenging that you're challenged with, and you want to challenge us to come right alongside you and provide support in any way that we can.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, please do stay in touch on Twitter, Facebook, here on YouTube. We're going to continue to releasing videos over the summer with material that we hope will be useful in the upcoming school year, but is also hopefully natively interesting this summer as you're thinking about planning out your classes. We know the work of educators never ends, and neither does ours. So we'll be here all summer releasing new videos, releasing new content. More information about all the content that we've been discussing here at the end of the webinar is available on our website. So do check it out. And we just also wanted to thank you for joining us over the past few months and over the past school year on 10th period. We really appreciate all the feedback that you provide, all the really dynamic conversations that are had in the comments section. We really appreciate it. We're here to serve you. And so as David mentioned, you know, any challenge that you want us to take on, we want to have that conversation with you, and we want to better facilitate that conversation in your classroom. So do stay in touch. Thank you again for watching and for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.